you have technology that literally the world's best athletes now wear to win championships, perform at a higher level, understand their bodies. And you, the individual, you, the consumer, can use that same technology to be a better executive, to lose weight, to understand more about your body, to share data with your doctor, right? All of a sudden, it takes something that previously might have been more medical sounding or negative sounding and takes it to a very aspirational, positive place.
This episode is brought to you by WeWork. The way you work has changed. The way you grow your business has changed. WeWork has flexible workspaces built for all the ways you work today, so you can drop in, connect with others, and get to your to-dos. Get out of the house for a few hours and pop by WeWork's co-working space when you need it. Looking to reconnect the team a few times a week? Bring everyone together in an office that fits what they need. Take meetings or offsites around the world from London to LA. Unlock hundreds of locations easily with all kinds of great amenities. They're even dog-friendly. Now you can try out your local WeWork for the day for 50% off. To redeem this offer, just go to we.co/behindthebrand, download the WeWork app, and use the code BehindTheBrand, and check out by April 15th, 2023 to receive 50% off your booking. This episode is brought to you by my brand new, absolutely free VIP list. Want to get a short note from me each week with what I've learned from interviewing some of the smartest people in the world, the best inspiration, education, access to my private events, special perks, unique finds, free stuff, and a lot more to help you improve your life and business? Get on the list. Just go to behindthebrand.tv/VIP. It's an email newsletter. It's as easy as that. 123 VIP. behindthebrand.tv/VIP and get on the list. This episode is brought to you by Vimeo. I've been a pro user of Vimeo basically since I started my production company in 2010. Vimeo is for creative professionals like me, and I use it in several different ways. For example, it's a place for me to upload my videos with a password for my clients to be able to review and download the work I'm doing for them. There's no compression, crushing of black colors, or oversaturation like what I get when I upload a YouTube video. My clients get the full 4K resolution HD as it was intended. I also use it to host and broadcast live events. I also use Vimeo for my portfolio, case studies, and it never has annoying pre-roll ads. I can create a customized player and keep people on my landing page so they don't get distracted and go down the rabbit hole watching someone else's stuff. What you may not know about Vimeo is that you can use it if you're in HR or if you own a company. You can put all of those onboarding videos all in one place, a nice, tidy, professional-looking playlist or playboard where people can consume and understand or download all the new training videos all in one place. You could also do the same thing if you teach a course. Imagine putting all your videos behind a paywall, charging for it, and then sending people the link with a password. Need a videographer, creative director, or editor? Vimeo lets you post jobs and find creative professionals. There's a ton more options, so I would suggest checking them out. Just go to vimeo.com and see what's possible.
Hi, I'm Will Ahmed, founder and CEO of Whoop, building wearable technology to improve health and performance. We're going to get into that journey today in Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian. Welcome to another episode. Will, thanks for having us to your world headquarters here in beautiful Boston.
Thanks for having me.
I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job?
Well, I started this job. In many ways, Whoop wasn't just the first company that I started. It was really the first full-time job I've ever had. I started this company out of the Harvard Innovation Lab as a senior at Harvard. I was 22 years old. I had fallen in love with the idea of being able to continuously measure the human body. And I didn't necessarily know what I was signing up for, but I had this burning passion to investigate technology that could continuously measure your body. And I did a ton of physiology research while I was a student at Harvard. I probably read about 500 medical papers while I was in school. And I ended up writing a paper around here are all the things I think you could measure to be able to really understand what's going on inside and how you could improve performance, how you could improve health. And that research led to founding Whoop. And at every stage, it's gotten more intense and exhilarating. But that's how I find myself here today, a little over 10 years later.
let's bring it back in the chronology. For those who don't know your background, I know you're an athlete growing up, squash player, golfer. I mean, what were you thinking about? What young Will? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, my father immigrated to this country with very little. He was an Egyptian immigrant, came here when he was 22, and very charismatic, very oriented towards business. He was sort of your stereotypical like run through a wall to get it done, and he worked in finance over time. So I remember going to JP Morgan when I was a kid and seeing what it was like to work in a financial firm. And so there was a little bit of an orientation towards finance. My mom, much more analytical, much more book smart, went to Exeter and Princeton. I'm an only child. So, you react, I think, fairly strongly to what your parents do as an only child. And the interesting thing about growing up under my parents is that I saw two real extremes, book smart, street smart, extrovert, introvert, shoot from the hip, deeply analytical. Like I saw different ways to solve problems and really on an extreme spectrum. And I think that was a helpful framework for becoming an entrepreneur, because as an entrepreneur, you're sort of constantly asking yourself, what's the best way around the wall, over the wall, through the wall?
Did they did they push you in any particular direction? Did they have biases towards finance or towards academia or?
I think I was always very self-motivated growing up. I think when I put my mind to something, it was pretty clear that was the path that I was going to be going on. I certainly was very into sports and exercise. I probably played a dozen sports, at the age of 10. I ended up playing squash at Harvard, and that experience of training 3 or 4 hours a day and somewhat randomly getting fitter and fitter and then falling off a cliff because you're overtrained or getting injured or peaking. It all seemed a little too random to me. And that's where I got interested in why can't you measure more about your body? I think also looking back on it, I was deeply fascinated by technology at a very young age.
Yeah. And let's put a timestamp on that time period, because I think that's also important. So about what time of the year was that? Give us a time period, timestamp on when you were thinking those things about, your athletic career, recovery, training.
Yeah, so this would have been around 2009, 2010. I'm like a sophomore at Harvard, 19 years old. And the technology at that point on the market would have been a chest strap, like the heart rate monitor that you wear around your chest.
Yeah. Super analog, basic.
Yeah, very basic. It was, by the way, created in the 1980s. So it'd been around for 30 plus years, which if you think about technology is a really long time to have the same type of product.
Yeah.
There were some Garmin type products. Sleep monitoring was non-existent. And heart rate variability, which I discovered, at least I thought would be one of the most interesting statistics for you to be able to measure continuously. The only way to measure it at the time was through an electrocardiogram.
Right, EKG, right? Yeah.
Yeah, which is like a $20,000 piece of machinery in a hospital.
Yeah,
so
not very mobile either. Yeah.
So that's where I started asking myself, okay, could we build technology to replace these things?
How did you do that? Because there was nothing else like it. So it wasn't like you were, it's not like, the iPhone came out and then you created the Android. Like you didn't have a model for it, right? I mean, other things came eventually, but like, how did you imagine that? Like, what was that process?
Well, I think that the first key in any successful venture is finding people with complementary skill sets to your own. I had a pretty strong point of view on what the technology needed to do, who we would sell it to, how we would build a brand, who we would target initially. And
Pause. How did you know all that as a 22-year-old?
Well, I said I had a strong perspective on it. There were, you can question how much of it at the time certainly was an inevitability.
Yeah.
But
I guess what I'm getting at is, how did you arrive at that point? Was it intuition? Were you making the product for people like you? So it was like mirroring, like, okay, people like me do stuff like this. And so it's very easy to create that. Was it that exercise?
I think I was certainly user one of the product and the technology. In many ways, I was building a solution that I thought would solve problems that I had experienced personally.
Right.
I think I also grew up very influenced or inspired by brands. And you mentioned you're a brand guy as well. For me, Nike was always the most inspiring brand, and in many ways still is today. And just the notion that you could put a swoosh on something and it would change the way you felt about an otherwise white cotton t-shirt. That was a phenomenon that from a very young age resonated for me as a sort of fascinating human thing.
Yeah.
Like this little symbol on the otherwise same thing changes the way someone feels about it. It changes the way you feel about owning it. And the reason that that's important for the story of Whoop is I felt strongly that the original users of our technology that we were going to build needed to be professional athletes.
Okay. Interesting.
And for two reasons. One, because professional athletes, I thought, needed the sleep and recovery data, the training data, many of the things that I experienced training improperly as an athlete.
Yeah.
But two, if we could get the world's best athletes to authentically fall in love with this type of technology and this product, we could build a whole brand around performance.
Yeah, it would be a halo effect, as they say.
Yeah. And health monitoring historically has had a very, almost stigmatized perception. If you're wearing a health monitor on your body, it could be a sign that there's something wrong with you.
Right.
So how can you make wearing a health monitor something positive, something aspirational?
Yeah. Can we go back and just unpack brand a little bit? This series is called Behind the Brand. We talk a ton about brand and branding. And the context of my questions are because I know people who watch this are also in startup mode or running their own thing. They're founders. They want to know a little bit how you did it. Let's define what is a brand, in your opinion?
I think a brand epitomizes what you stand for. And a really great brand has a very strong and consistent message around that. So, in the case of Nike, the visualization of a swoosh, the slogan of just do it, the constant imagery of the Michael Jordan, the Tiger Woods, the Roger Federers, conquering their thing. And then all of a sudden the swoosh transcending sport and being something broader about how you want to approach your life. So the Whoop analogy to that is you have technology that literally the world's best athletes now wear to win championships, perform at a higher level, understand their bodies. And you, the individual, you, the consumer, can use that same technology to be a better executive, to lose weight, to understand more about your body, to share data with your doctor, right? All of a sudden, it takes something that previously might have been more medical sounding or negative sounding and takes it to a very aspirational, positive place.
And you're very smart to use athletes, basically to establish your street cred, because it takes all the risk and questioning out of it. Like, is this legitimate or not? Well, if Patrick Mahomes wears it, if it's good enough for Patrick or Michael Phelps, it's good enough for me.
Yeah. And it's really hard to fake wearing something 24/7.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to wear something on your body 24/7 unless you get a lot of value out of it.
Right.
And this goes back to
deliberate.
It's deliberate, but it's also like, if it's not a huge valuable thing for you, it would be a huge nuisance.
It's functional. Yeah.
Yeah. Early on in the company's development, there were a lot of people who said to me, you need to pay these athletes, or you need to do a big sponsorship deal with them. Like, because two of our first 100 users were people like LeBron James and Michael Phelps.
Yeah, no big deal.
We're this tiny company. And yet we had these superstars, right? This would have been like 2014, 2015.
Okay.
So a popular feedback loop was, sign them, lock them up, make a big deal. And I said, you have to understand, they're wearing the product because it gives them value.
Right.
And there's no amount of money we could pay a professional athlete to wear this thing 24/7 if it didn't give them value.
Yeah.
But if it did, then all of a sudden it's making a difference in their performance.
Yeah. Although, I sort of understand the context of that advice because that's the Nike model. It's even the Red Bull model. And maybe those are two extreme examples. No dig on Red Bull, but it's a product that's not good for you. And yet they've bought, into the market by buying sponsorship, buying athletes. Nike has seeded the market by investing in athletes, but they can back it up because their stuff's functional and it's performance based, and so it works. But yeah, I love the approach that you're taking because it's gotta walk the talk. Otherwise, we're not going to wear it.
Yeah, and I do think there's probably a difference between creating a brand and maintaining a brand.
Yeah.
Like if you look back at Nike's origins and Phil Knight's story, a lot of it was building the best shoe and, waffling the thing at Oregon and making it something that's very unique and something the market hadn't seen to help a guy like Prefontaine actually run faster, right? Like that was the origin of Nike, and the origin of Whoop was to be able to create technology that could actually make you perform better.
Yeah. Something that my mentor, Seth Godin, taught me a while back, and also one of the godfathers of brand marketing, Marty Neumeier, he said really that a brand is your shorthand, like for what you stand for. And Seth described it to me like this. He said, if Nike built a hotel, we would know exactly, if you kind of close your eyes, what it would smell like or feel like, or sort of the essence of that hotel. And whether or not you have a brand, sort of depends on whether or not it's distinct or distinctive, right? And so compare that with some of the other, like say, hotel chains out there. Can you go to the lobby, kind of, not look at the marquee, look down at the carpet, and do you know where you are? And if you do know exactly where you are, then you have a brand. If you don't, you just have a logo, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I mean, it's worth cautioning that, especially if you're creating a company from scratch, there's a lot of reasons to not try to build a brand or to not have that be a core area of differentiation.
Yeah.
Because it can often be more expensive. It can often be slower. Just working with professional athletes for 2, 3, 4 years and building that whole momentum around leagues and athletes, it cost us a lot of money doing that because we were spending time with a very small market. There's like 10,000 professional athletes in the world.
Yeah.
Rounds to zero on a global population. And so it's time consuming to be really focused there. And you look at other products like FitBit, Nike's Fuel Band, whatever, those products went straight to market, straight to consumers. In fact, one sign that I felt Whoop had a chance to be really successful was that Nike's Fuel Band wasn't being worn by Nike's biggest athletes.
Interesting.
Right? Here you are paying LeBron James or paying fill in the blank all this money, and yet they're not wearing your wearable that's supposed to be about health.
And why don't you think they were wearing it?
Well, because it wasn't giving them value that was relevant for them.
Yeah.
Right? But so that's where I felt that if you look back on Nike, Adidas, Under Armour in the space, and they spent a lot of money in the space, they all skipped a step.
Mm-hmm.
They skipped the step of top of the pyramid, their best ambassadors, their best athletes adopting it, and then telling that story broadly.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So you were able to get those big names. How did you find out what it would take for them to wear it?
Well, a lot of the challenges in the early years of the company were around, one, making the technology really accurate, and two, making it a product that you could wear 24/7.
Yeah. I mean, behind us here is this sort of timeline of events, right? Describe kind of what we see back here. I mean, there's a very big, chunky, almost looks like a, I can't even describe it, what that is, that big yellow thing.
Yeah. So you're describing essentially a computer box that has this huge wire coming off of it.
Yeah.
That then it connects to another little sensor suite that then you would wear. And by the way,
it's chunky, like, I don't know.
The
like
box is probably the size of your head.
Yeah.
And by the way, that box also had to connect to a computer.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how unwearable that whole system was.
Yeah.
But that product was the very first product in the world to be able to measure heart rate variability from the wrist, which, is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So one theme to building a company is what is the milestone at each stage that you need to complete to sort of prove to investors or prove to yourself that you can get the company to the next stage.
So was Whoop the very first, even before all the other competitors, to do that?
For heart rate variability, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah. Oh, we were obsessed with being able to replace an electrocardiogram, which measured heart rate variability, replace a chest strap, which measured heart rate during all different forms of exercise, and then measure sleep as accurately as a PSG machine, which is like the gold standard for sleep.
Yeah.
And we spent tens of millions of dollars doing that before we ever generated revenue.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the early years of the company for me were spent fundraising, running out of money, and learning how to overcome an enormous amount of stress and sort of feeling of insecurity in building a business.
And that is interesting, though, that you basically built the brand around HRV, right? Because why? You felt like that was the most important metric?
I thought the single most important metric we were going to bring to market was this idea of recovery. So every day you wake up, from 0 to 100%, am I red, yellow, or green? And if you think about training optimally, it's really matching how recovered you are with how much strain you put on your body. So if I'm run down, I'm going to take on less strain. If I'm peaking, I'm going to take on more strain, and so forth. And if I look back on the paper that I wrote at Harvard, it was called the feedback tool, measuring intensity, recovery, and sleep. And intensity, of course, became strain. But it played on this relationship between strain and recovery. Mm-hmm. And if you could measure each of those, you could tell someone what to do. Mm-hmm. And sleep, of course, being a massive contributor to recovery. So all of a sudden you have this system now, which is very similar to the system today. You wake up in the morning, the recovery score tells you how much strain to take on. The strain is automatically measured throughout the day. Yeah. At the end of the day, based on how much stress you've put on your body, it tells you how much sleep you need. You go to bed, you wake up, you get your sleep analysis, you get a new recovery, and it restarts, right? So it's trying to live a step ahead of you.
Yeah. To me, it's fascinating because I think it's really easy from a consumer standpoint to lump all of the wearables in together as basically the same, but they are not. I mean, you can't make a phone call from your Whoop and, tracking how many steps you take and all, it's not about that.
Yeah. Whoop is great at all the things that it does for all the things it doesn't do. And, I think I've made plenty of mistakes over the course of building Whoop. I think one thing that directionally we got right was this maniacal focus around health monitoring. Mm-hmm. We've never let the sensor become anything other than a health monitor. It's all about measuring health. Mm-hmm. And so in a given day, we collect an enormous amount of health data, much more than any other product in the market. We've been shown to be the most accurate wearable as shown by third-party validation.
Yeah.
We have this enormously high user engagement within the app because the data is there and it's accessible and it's actionable. And, I think if we were a smartwatch and we were doing emails and push notifications and phone calls, I don't think the business would exist today.
Yeah. And so that's just maybe a lesson I can extract about, would you call it niching down? Is that what you'd call it? Or hyper-focus?
I think it's really important to really clearly understand why you're building something and what problem you're solving. And so it was very clear to me that human beings didn't know how to measure their bodies. The best way to do it would be to measure it 24/7. And you needed to give feedback on sleep and recovery and exercise, right? So that was like the focus from the beginning.
Yeah.
Then along the way, okay, you've created a sensor, someone's wearing it on their body, and someone says, oh, well, it should tell the time.
Yeah.
And then you play that out and you're like, okay, well, you put a watch face on it. Oh, well, then it's a screen. Oh, maybe it should do emails. Next thing you know, you're in a product meeting and it's completely has nothing to do with health. And all of a sudden you're talking about how many times it should vibrate to get emails.
Right.
And it's hard to understate how enormously distracting that is and how fast your value proposition can disintegrate.
Yeah.
And you've seen this happen with 10 to 20 of the best companies in the world, where they've launched these sort of weird health wearable smartwatch products that clearly have way too many use cases and no killer feature. And they're almost like solutions in need of a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just a good reminder, right? If you try to please everyone, you usually please no one, that this hyper focus, or at least finding your product market fit, is the key. And you continue to double down on it. I mean, it sounds like you guys have been preaching about a recovery, including sleep, heart rate, some of these core metrics that we know today in 2023. But like, sleep wasn't a thing back in, 2009, 2012. I mean, we weren't even thinking about this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed very obvious to me that at some point every human in the world would measure how they slept.
Yeah.
And the idea that you would spend a third of your life having it be this black box didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I want to go back to the athletes. So I'm going to push you a little harder on giving me a more detailed answer. How did you find out what LeBron wanted, or Patrick wanted, or Michael wanted in this product? Did you sit down with them and kind of like what I imagine the Nike designers do? Like they sit and they collaborate with them and they hear their dreams and wishes. Like, how did you know what the top athletes in the world wanted and needed?
I didn't know what the top athletes in the world wanted, but I had a pretty strong point of view on what I thought should exist. And part of the challenge in building the company was working up the courage to go against that grain. So literally when I went to meet with athletes and coaches, call it in 2011, 2012, and I asked them, if you could have technology for anything to make your job more effective, like what would you want? And I got a ton of feedback around things related to exercise. Better sweat analysis, better velocity analysis, GPS analysis, video analysis.
Okay. About form and speed and...
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when I asked them, well, what are some of your biggest problems? I would often hear about injury, overtraining, not peaking on the right day. And I thought there was a real mismatch between the solutions that the market was asking for and the problem that they were describing.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a learning for an entrepreneur in that. When you hear that big of a difference between what you think's the answer and what the market thinks is the answer, there may be a huge opportunity. Or you could be totally wrong, right? But that's where you, the entrepreneur, feels all sorts of passion and doubt, and you're trying to wrestle through it. And for many, for the first few years of the company, I was wrestling with that insecurity because I was building something that many people weren't asking for.
Yeah, it's this idea that Henry Ford gets credited with, right? He's, if they would have asked me what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Sure. I mean, that's a very positive analogy.
So I would imagine that it was tough sledding then in the beginning because you didn't know, you were creating your own future. You had it maybe imagined, but you didn't have it validated yet by the market. You had to tell them what was important. Were there times where maybe your investors were saying it's, putting pressure on you to pivot or go a different way, or talk about that?
Well, I faced, I would say, enormous stress and anxiety, really leading up to starting the company. So call it in 2011 to 2012. And then for the first, 3-4 years of building the company, I felt enormous insecurity and anxiety around building this business, because you have to understand, I wasn't just building Whoop, I was building Will. Like, who am I? What am I doing running this thing?
Yeah.
Right?
We should also underscore your age at this time. So it's not to be underestimated. I mean, age is a number, it's all about your skills, your knowledge, but there's a point where wisdom or life experience comes into play. I mean, how old were you at the time?
I was 22.
Yeah. I mean, 2012.
Yeah.
You're still a young man.
Yeah.
Figuring out who he is, your brain's not even fully developed, right? You've got 2 or 3 more years until that even happens. Right. And you're struggling with running this little startup that's got massive ambition, but you don't know whether it's going to go or not. That must have been incredibly difficult.
It was. And
How did you do that?
yeah, there were certain coping mechanisms that I had then that I think you want to learn to overcome or evolve past. One coping mechanism was I really put up pretty strong barriers to feedback. I mean, I didn't even hear what people were saying.
Okay. Interesting.
And I wouldn't recommend that, by the way. That came from a place of insecurity, and it came from a place of not being able to cope with just how negative the feedback I was getting was.
Yeah.
Because I was getting a lot of feedback that sort of seems natural in hindsight. What does a 22-year-old who isn't an engineer know about building this technology?
Right.
You're going to build something that no one in the market is actually asking for. You're going to target a very small market. We just heard Nike's coming out with a product. We heard Apple's about to come out with a product. Like, this is what I would hear.
Yeah.
Pretty much every time I went to pitch the company.
Yeah.
And frankly, it was pretty demoralizing. If the more I let it seep in.
Well, yeah, the two behemoths in the market, right?
Yeah.
And so, what year did Apple Watch come out?
It would have been probably 2015.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're 2 or 3 years into this.
But it was well known. It was coming out years before.
Of course.
The Fuel Band came out in 2013. And so that was like a year into building the company.
Yeah. So that was like, oof,
Adidas came out in 2014. Under Armour spent $1 billion. Kevin Plank was on the cover of Forbes saying that wearable and digital health was the future of the company.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. So, but you were able to weather that storm by basically putting blinders on or, tuning it out.
Yeah, there was an important, I think, tipping point for me around age 24, 25. At that point, I had raised tens of millions of dollars. I had gotten good at selling the story, and I truly believed it, right? It wasn't like I was faking that. I was very clear about why this should exist, why it was inevitable it was going to exist, and why I thought we could build it. But it was taking a lot longer to create the technology, and especially to have the technology be ready to go to market. And so, I'd raised tens of millions of dollars. The team was maybe 20, 30 people. But just the size of that money and the number of people who worked in an organization I was responsible for, it felt like the weight of the world on my shoulders,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
And so I was very strung out. I wasn't sleeping well. I was drinking too much. Like, I didn't know how to cope with all of it. And I had a panic attack at one point during that phase. And so I started to really lean into what are ways that I can learn to better manage myself. If you're listening to this and you're wondering how you can get your business to the next level, it may be that you need to figure out how you can get yourself to the next level. And that was really important for me because I was spiraling out of control. And by the way, from the outside in, I probably looked fine, right?
Sure.
That's the other thing about being an entrepreneur. It's a little chaotic. But around that time period, I learned how to meditate. And that really helps me start looking at myself in a very different way. It allowed me to look at myself much more introspectively. It allowed me to move past this sort of barriers that I had put up to feedback and noise and negativity.
Mm-hmm.
I remember an advisor saying to me, Will, you don't have to listen to everyone's feedback, but you should try to hear it.
Okay.
And that was a helpful framing, again, where it's like, you want to make sure you're wrestling with this information that you're getting. You want to make sure that you are able to constantly be asking yourself, why do you feel so strongly about what you feel?
Right.
Right. And almost second guessing yourself, but in a healthy way, having a conversation with yourself. So all of that happened around the ages of 24, 25. I still meditate every single day since. So it became a practice in my life that I'm obsessed with. And my evolution as an entrepreneur was, yes, keep the blinders on. Yes, stay focused. But I think I became a much more open and accessible person to work with.
Yeah.
And if you're going to go from having 30 employees to 500, you really have to evolve how you operate as a manager or a leader.
Yeah, it makes me think of a couple things. Again, I want to underscore some of these lessons that I'm hearing from you. One is this idea that, you know, you just sort of described going through hell and back emotionally, maybe even physically. And there's only one way to really get experience, and that's just to do it, right? The only reason I have calluses right here is because I've been doing pull-ups. And you can't fake being good at pull-ups.
True.
You just have to do them, you know? And you can't get calluses any other way than to do the work. And so, maybe if you're young, or even if you're not young and you're wishing you could just be on the other side of that, you got to run the gauntlet and you got to go through it. And the irony, or the mystery of this formula to success is you got to feel a little bit of the pain to get to the other side to get the gain. And I'm also thinking, now here we are about 7 years after that event. What is a strongly held belief that you had at that time that you just thought was, it's this way, it's only this way, that now you no longer believe? And here we are 7 years later, and you don't have that firm belief. What's changed?
Well, one of the biggest shifts that occurs from managing an organization of, I would call it 10 to 50 people versus 100 plus, is the degree to which you, the individual contributor, add a lot of value versus you, the manager or the leader. Mm-hmm. And that can be a somewhat painful shift if you're only used to being able to jump in on stuff and do stuff yourself, right? And so I had a belief as a young entrepreneur that I could do it, right? Like I could find a way, I could figure it out. I didn't lack that bias for action, and I didn't lack that self-confidence. I had doubt all the time, but I always felt like I could drive through it.
The tenacity.
Yeah. The thing though, that where that becomes an inhibiting characteristic is when you need to get it to a place where you're building out a phenomenal management team and a world-class management team. Because what you really need to do is hire great people and empower them.
Yeah, people who can do the stuff that you can't do.
Totally. And by the way, I wouldn't be anywhere in building this business if I hadn't gotten to work with amazingly talented people. So it was learning to actually empower, delegate more, and find a system for which you have checks and balances in place, but where you, the individual, aren't trying to solve problems yourself, right? And again, I was a very young entrepreneur, and so there was I think a feeling like, okay, I got to take this on, when actually it's better to take a step back, right, and let other people take it on.
Yeah, and I'll chime in from my own experience. Maybe it's not because you feel more capable, but I felt, correct me, tell me your opinion. You feel this accountability, this responsibility. It's like you've got to, like you're taking out the trash, and you're also, filing the paperwork, with the government, or you're opening the bank account, but you're also vacuuming and wiping down the kitchen area, like you're doing everything.
Yeah, I think strengths and weaknesses can sometimes be on the same side of the coin.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, if you're hard driving and detail oriented, you may not be as good at delegation and empowerment. Right? And so at various points in your career, you want to figure out where are you on these certain pendulums, and how can you balance between them, right? Another example is being able to look at your business from 30,000 feet versus 3 feet, right? And like zooming in and out. That's something that I didn't fully understand in the earlier years of the company, today I would say I'm much more cognizant of.
And how do you do that? How do you look at it from 30,000 feet?
Well, 30,000 feet would be saying, what are the bets that we're making today that are going to have a huge impact on where the company's going to be in 2 years or 3 years? And those bets could be hiring certain people. They could be building certain teams. They could be pursuing certain technology that may take 2 years to build. Mm-hmm. They could be strategic partnerships. They could be brand positioning. That's all very, I think of that as being, looking at your business from a different vantage point.
Yeah, it's big picture stuff.
Yeah. Even asking yourself, how are you operating within the business? what role are you playing in the business? Is that the right role for you to be playing for the business to be able to get to that next stage? I mean, when you talk about zooming out, you almost think about looking down on yourself in the process, right? And seeing how you're living and behaving in this company you're creating.
Yeah, it is a little bit of an out-of-body experience, right?
Totally. And again, that was something that I struggled with early on in the business. And through meditating and self-awareness and other things, I would say is now maybe more of a strength. The close-up is probably what most people are familiar with in running the business because it's sort of the natural thing. It's the meeting you're in. It's the what's our sales number this month? It's the, did we launch that thing yet or not?
Customer feedback. Hey, this strap is too loose or that's too small or whatever.
And by the way, you could go 6 months where you're just doing that, right? And so that's where I say zoom in, zoom out, right? You want to be able to be in both places. And the person, by the way, who's only up here and only in zoom out land, they don't get a lot done either. So you really do have to be able to zoom in and out.
I mean, so here we are overlooking Fenway Park in Boston. It's sort of obvious that we're not in Silicon Valley or we're not in New York City. Talk to me about building the team and maybe tell that story about going to Germany.
Oh, sure. So in the earliest days of the company, I actually thought I would move Whoop to New York because I grew up in New York and I liked the hard charging pace of Manhattan. We started working at the Harvard Innovation Lab, and one thing sort of led to another. I was working with John Capilupo and Aurelian Nicolai, and they're both brilliant technical leaders, both out of Harvard. Math. John was a math and computer science whiz. Nicolai was an engineering whiz. But there was a clear hole on our, call it founding team, which was, how is this going to look and feel? And I don't just mean the sensor and the hardware. I mean, like visually, how are you going to interact with your data? And I had this strong feeling that the way the data was going to be presented to people was going to be a lot of our success or failure. How you interacted with it, what you learned from it. Okay. So we're sitting in the Harvard Innovation Lab. It's the three of us. We've got a few interns that summer. The average age of the group is probably around 19 or 20 years old, but when you factor in the interns, so it's a really young group of people. And we didn't have anyone working on design effectively. And so I did what I knew how to do at the time, which was Google. And I Googled best information graphics designer in the world.
Just like that.
Yeah. And the second link was a website called Behance. And Behance is, for those who don't know, is kind of like LinkedIn for designers. Mm-hmm. And up pops a guy named Martin Oberhauser's profile, and a German designer. And I looked at the information in front of me, and it was his portfolio. And it was beautiful and visual. And sure enough, he was ranked number 1 on Behance for information graphics design. Which if you were to sort of point at what did we needed information graphics design. So I said, oh, this is perfect. And I called, there was a phone number right there. So I called the phone number.
I'm just blown away right now. Like how, basically it's just like a cold call, you're door knocking. I mean, you just dialed it up.
Well, I'll tell the story, but for every version of this story, there's 20 versions that didn't work, right? Okay. So that's the thing to keep in mind. So I call this number and one ring, Oberhauser, like German voice on the ball. And I'm like, oh, hi, Martin. I'm looking at your profile. I really admire your work. I'm starting this company. We're going to collect a lot of health data, And he's like, oh, it's very nice of you to call, this and that. And, in a very gentle way, he kind of big times me. He's like, look, I'm working on something with Tesla and Airbnb and Apple, and I just don't think I'm going to have time for this. Right. And I get a lot of calls like this, and, best of luck. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I go back to my Harvard Innovation Lab desk next to, the rest of the group. And I'm like, yeah, that didn't really work out. And it's like, people are like, yeah, of course that didn't work out. So, but, I think it's important when you're building something to listen to that voice or that intuition and see where that takes you. And for me, I had this really strong feeling that voice I had just spoken to was a voice that I was going to hear again and again and again. And so the next day I called him again, and I, again, one ring, Oberhauser. I said, look, hey, we spoke yesterday, and I want you to know I'm going to build this company. We're going to have the most health data on the human body ever before. And the way we visualize this data is going to be core to our success. And I think you're supposed to design that experience. And he says, well, that's very nice of you. I'm based here in Germany. You're in the States. I don't have a lot of availability. And I said, look, if I flew to Hamburg and just told you more about the company, would you spend an hour with me? And there's like this long pause on the phone. And he says, you're going to fly here, but I don't have to work with you. I said, yeah, but you have to spend an hour with me. And he says, okay, no problem. So
Right.
just like that.
Yeah.
And so I remember it was the 4th of July because I canceled plans. And so I flew that weekend to Hamburg, where I'd never been before.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, an hour with Martin became the next 2.5 days. And we struck an agreement to work together. And, he's been our lead designer now for 11 years.
Amazing. I love that story.
And is, one of the most important pieces of the story of building Whoop.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons there as well. The tenacity gene is strong with you. I love that story. Thank you for telling that. Can we talk about the naming? How'd you come up with the name, and what's the story behind that?
Well, the name Whoop was this word that friends of mine at Harvard would say to sort of express energy or excitement. So people would say to one another, oh, how do you feel for the match? Oh, I feel good. I got Whoop. And it was like this, it was this uplifting, somewhat viral word amongst my friends.
Okay.
And when I was thinking about what to name a company, a word that makes you smile, that's super memorable, that has a certain virality to it, those were all the ingredients that felt right. And it's hard to name by consensus. That was probably another thing that at the time felt very controversial and didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. But that's sort of the nature of building something.
Yeah, I mean, I think you take a chance, right? Like there's a lot of schools of thought on this. Do you name it something that sounds like what it does? If that's like a FitBit or something like that, does it sound like something that's already similar in the market so that there's easier adoption? The Apple Watch is done, everyone knows what a watch is, but then there's all this other functionality. Or do you create, as Seth would say, the purple cow, something that's worth remarking about, that's remarkable, that's different, that stands out, that you sort of do a double take that's not expected? And I think that's what Whoop does. It's unexpected. It sort of throws you for a little bit of the loop. It makes you do that double take. But it's got all the street cred to then back it up.
Yeah, look, it's been a great name for the company. I found that a typical naming exercise leads you down these sort of stereotypical fit, pulse.
Right. It does what it says.
It's like, yeah, and they all fell flat to me. Yeah. Whereas I remembered the feeling of saying this word to my friends and them saying it back to me. And I remembered how memorable it was.
Yeah.
And so to me, there was a gravitational pull again. And I think like in building a business, it's important, and just in general, I think as an executive in your daily life, it's important to ask yourself, how do you make decisions? And how have you made successful decisions? And how have you made decisions that went poorly? And are there learnings you can pull from those? Mm-hmm. And for me, at least, I found that when I could sit with an idea and really feel it and feel like a pull to it, that intuition tended to be a good guiding force.
All right. So maybe in closing here, so we can stay on schedule, let's look at the past, the present, the future. Okay. Can you think about a mistake that you made in the past that you learned from that really helped propel you into where you are now and into the future? And the reason I say that, the context is, I hear out in the world, or at least from my audience a lot, people will say stuff like, failure is not an option. And say it with good intentions, but the reality is, and I know now from running my company, failure has to be an option. Like, if you're not failing, you're not trying, or you're hiding, right? So what are some of these things that you got wrong in order to get it right today and maybe propel you into the future?
Well, I'll say this about failure. I do think that failure is largely overrated in the way that it's romanticized today. People talk about failing fast and embracing failure. And I've actually had a very strong orientation towards avoiding, towards really trying to not fail. Now, I want to be explicitly clear in saying this. The best thing about the messaging of, fail fast and romanticizing failure is really what I think is more important. And it's this idea of don't having a fear of failure.
Right.
Don't have a fear of failure. And so those are two slightly different things. And I just want to underscore that because not everyone will agree with what I just said.
Well, and why shouldn't you have a fear of failure?
Well, all the most exhilarating and exciting things that are going to happen in your life are going to feel a little scary out of the gates. And if you're afraid to fail, you're never going to take the leap.
Right.
I mean, I felt like a bit of a loser starting Whoop when I was a senior at Harvard. I mean, all my friends were getting these high-paying jobs. I was going to go live in this like small, tiny little apartment next to a Harvard Innovation Lab, not taking a salary. It was a huge leap. And if I had been afraid of failing, I never in a million years would have done that. Now, Whoop almost did fail, like about as close to failing as you possibly can come. We very nearly ran out of money. And this would have been like in 2017. So 5 or 6 years in. And I even remember the process of going through and like writing an investor update. Like, dear investors, thank you so much for all of your support. I'm sorry to report that, Whoop has not. And so like, I actually felt all the feelings of it.
You went through the mechanics of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And I all I can tell you is it was so painful. And if that had been the end of it, I think I would have learned a lot of the wrong lessons from my experience building the company. I would have learned that it was too ambitious. You needed to start with a smaller idea and iterate your way to the bigger one. I would have learned that brand building is too expensive and you want to go first to the larger market, because that was right at that intersection before we were going to consumers, 2017. I would have second guessed probably a lot about my own intuition of what the world needs despite what the world's telling you.
Yeah.
And the amount of work and energy and persistence that it took to get past that specific moment in time, this incredibly uncomfortable period of time in my life where I felt like I was losing this thing that I'd thought about every second for 5 years or 6 years, and figuring out a way to get through it and overcome it. And then now come out the other side and having built this amazing business. Like, for me, the learning is that moment of overcoming it. And pulling through. And so that's why I don't react very positively to this notion of, sort of allowing failure to be an option, because the most profound learnings I've gotten have been overcoming that moment where failure was very likely.
Yeah.
I will say though that you want to do everything in your power to overcome a fear of failure.
Yeah. Let's go back to that moment too. It's intriguing. It's something I still struggle with now, which is how long do you give this quote, brilliant idea, until you either pivot or cut bait? Like, how did you know that you should see it through? Did you have any other options? Or like, what signals did you get? And again, give you some context. So when I was working for other people, when I was not running my own company, I definitely stayed at a company too long. And I was hearing the signals, like I knew I should quit, leave. But I stayed like another 2 years. It was just not a good call. I should have listened to my gut. How did you know? Like, how do you know? What signals did you have that you should see it through?
Well, one fact of the matter was I was all in. Like, It wasn't like I was doing this 30% of my time.
Yeah.
And, it was 110% of my energy for 6 years.
Yeah.
The other thing was I didn't feel like I had learned something from the market or the world that had proven the original thesis wrong. In fact, I felt even more strongly that it was inevitable that people were going to continuously wear a health monitor that told them everything about their bodies and how to improve their health.
Mm-hmm.
All the things that, all the challenges that I faced in that moment really pertained to how expensive it was to run the company and the stage that we were at relative to the amount of the amount of cash we had raised relative to the revenue profile. Essentially, we'd raised a ton of money at that point, probably $50 million to have built very sophisticated technology, but we hadn't yet turned it into a big business.
Right.
And so when you're in a situation like that, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to raise more capital at a higher valuation so your earlier investors are still satisfied, and then build a business off of it. And so I fortunately figured out how to thread that needle and how to attract more investors. And the irony is that round of financing, I think, has the fastest IRR, right? Like the highest rate of return of any financing we did. And it was by far the hardest to raise.
Mm-hmm.
12 months of just painful no's and
doing the roadshow and all that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain persistence and belief system that you have to build during that. And I think I got some of it from the fact that for so long we had been told that these big companies were going to kill us. And the big companies by then had largely failed, or many of them had. And so now I needed to prove that we could still build a business. Mm-hmm. And I felt like we had the technology and the brand to do it.
So now as we look forward into the future a little bit, maybe 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, where are you headed?
The idea that you go see a doctor on a random day of the year, and that doctor's then taking a few measurements, no context what happened yesterday, what happened the last week.
It's a snapshot.
Yeah, it'd be like rating a movie based on one frame of the movie.
Yeah.
Like that's how incomprehensible it is to me.
Yeah.
The way our healthcare system's set up.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
And you want to be able to measure the body continuously, and you want to build towards a relationship with your own body where you know what are certain things that you can do to perform at a higher level, that you can have a better lifestyle or the right behaviors and diets and et cetera for you. And then you also want to, I think, have a relationship with the healthcare system where you don't go see a doctor on a random day of the year. You go see a doctor 30 minutes before something's about to happen. And if we can shift in this country all these curative costs to being preventative costs, we can start to reinvent the way the healthcare system looks. So that gets me very excited. It's still very obvious to me that one day everyone's going to be wearing a health monitor continuously, and it's going to make humans much healthier and perform at a higher level. And so that's the vision, and that's the trajectory that we're on right now.
Yeah. I'm super glad to hear you say that. It's been a dream of mine too. Ever since it's been about a decade, I've been on this real health journey. As I'm getting older, things are changing, and I'm trying to stay healthy and prevent a lot of things. I lost my dad a couple of years ago.
Sorry to hear that.
He was 69, left way too early. And so I'm trying to stick around longer. But I'm with you. I kind of hear what you're saying, reading between the lines. I mean, I wish that there were means in place or a system where we could keep track. Like when I take my car in to get repaired, they do a whole diagnostic and there's a report, and that gets banked. And then when I go back the next time, they'll say, "Oh, this is what happened before," and they can compare and contrast. How the engine is performing or the electrical system is performing. Why can't we have that for our body, right? We take blood panel tests, we have all this data, but why can't we have hey, whatever age you are now, 6 months from now or a month from now or 12 months from now or 3 years into the future, I want to be able to track all of these important metrics. Could be my heart rate, could be my blood pressure, could be my, cortisol levels, whatever it is. I'd love to have that in a database in place where the doctor could then look at historicals up and back and say, oh, I see a pattern here, based on my medical training.
Yeah, and you will, and you shouldn't have more information on your car or your computer or your cell phone than you have on yourself.
Right? Yeah.
And
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You can have all these different motivations in life, but the moment that your health collapses, you have one motivation, and it's to get healthy.
Nothing else matters.
Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
So, having that companion, that tool with you, which is certainly what Whoop wants to be in someone's life, I think is quite valuable.
Maybe give entrepreneurs some of your best advice, Will.
Well, I became an entrepreneur before I really knew what an entrepreneur was. And if you're listening to this, it's almost impossible for you to have less experience than I did when I started Whoop. And so there's this mistake that you can make in trying to become an entrepreneur or even at the starting gates of being an entrepreneur. And I made this mistake, which is you compare yourself to really successful entrepreneurs and you say, oh, I'm having trouble hiring this person. I bet Steve Jobs never had trouble hiring that person,
Right.
and you sort of compare yourself to some superstar. And the reality is, I don't think that fill in the blank successful entrepreneur CEO actually knew all that much more than you did the moment they started. But the thing that they did really well, which is the thing that you're going to need to do really well, is grow and adapt and grow and adapt. And so being very focused on how you can keep getting a little bit better in the role and being introspective about what that requires and really looking at your strengths and weaknesses and trying to adapt over time. I think that's a very, I think that's a very important piece to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's true. We don't see all the little intricacies, all the little mental battles, the panic attacks, the pressure from investors, the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt. It's hard. And I think if I were to boil it down in the 500, almost maybe more, if I were to boil it down to the 500 plus interviews talking to some of the smartest people on the planet to date, that's the common thread, is not giving up. They just had this perseverance to push through the hard things, to pivot or to push right through, to break through, to keep on trying. It's just like this Thomas Edison spirit, of experimenting 9,000 times before you finally figure out, the one thing that will work. Whether it's process of elimination or innovation or believing in your vision of thinking like a Steve Jobs, they all have that common thread, which is not giving up.
Yeah, I think there's certain requirements: persistence, really high work ethic, integrity. But beyond that, you're going to learn how to grow into the version of yourself that is the successful entrepreneur.